I came out to Eye of the Tiger. I was wearing a hat that said, or I was holding a hat that said director on it, and I had a mask on, no shirt, tights, and I just said, "I'm the director, screw you all," and I turned heel for the evening, and then got beat up by the wrestlers, and J Prep put his ass in my face. It was, don't tell my wife, it was the greatest night of my life.
It's been a long time since the movie came out, so I don't know if you can channel your emotions as it was happening back then, but rewatching it every time, I just have to wonder, like, were you more scared at the time that people were going to think the movie was homophobic, or that people were going to find out you were a wrestling fan? What was the greater fear?
To answer the wrestling fan thing, it was the greatest gift ever, because I was trying to make a film career, and as you well know, as people wrestling fans know, you don't usually admit in pleasant sort of normal company that you are a wrestling fan. It's sort of, you have to explain it, and people are like, "What the fuck's wrong with you?" And you're like, "Are you a child? Why don't you grow up?" Things like that. And I think that wrestling is a great art form, and I love it. But the film was a gift because I got to people were like, "Oh, you're the wrestling guy who made that movie," and then it turns out there's a bunch of Jordan is a wrestling fan there's a bunch of film wrestling fans, and there's a lot of overlap in some of the ideas between the two. And so I was, that's the best thing that happened from the movie, was that I got to come out as a wrestling fan. Now, the homophobic stuff, the truth is that that's how guys talk to each other. I think the crazy thing is, I honestly think the presence of a camera, even in Lincolnton, North Carolina, in 2016 versus 2011, 5 years later, I think they would not be speaking like that in front of the camera. The most alarming thing, there's that, and then when J Prep says something racist, the most alarming thing for me was that they felt like they could just say these things around me, and obviously I was just part of the team. Right. "Oh, you hate gays and black people too, right?" No, I don't. But I just recorded it, and I mean that's how they talk to each other. That's how I grew up talking to my friends. Truthfully, I mean, I didn't say black monkey ever, but I did say make fun of people for being gay and stuff and they made fun of me for they made fun of me for being gay, for being honest. But the truth, and then I think when you see the movie, you see that at least with Chris Solar's character, one of the things I love about wrestling is that in this style of wrestling, not in the corporate sort of style, but in this style of wrestling, it is sort of about getting out these things that otherwise aren't polite, and it's about sort of working through some of these ideas. And I think Solar is gay is a very, very complicated thing, because the crowd is chanting Solar is gay, but he's in on it, and they're laughing, and they're part of the story, and he's also taking his clothes off and hugging men, and there's nothing more homoerotic than wrestling. So it's all sort of built in. So I just didn't really care much about that. I just laid that out there. I mean, I obviously didn't care that much because the first words out of the movie are "I'm not a fag" or something like that, which is kind of a crazy way to start a movie. But that's it kind of hit the spot, I think.
People are here to hear you talk, but my relationship with the movie as a wrestling fan touches on a lot of what you were just talking about. That when I was watching the movie for the first time, with a big crowd of people were there to watch the movie, when the first Solar is Gay or the movie started, I was just like, "Oh, they're not going to get this."
It's Williamsburg. Yeah, 500 people in Williamsburg.
I was worried as a wrestling fan that this was going to affect people's perception negatively.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the show, Chris Solar came out to wrestle a match, and the entire amassed crowd in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, started chanting "Solar is gay," and it was one of the most kind of heartwarming moments I've ever been a part of.
I think you really have to be a wrestler to know why that was so heartwarming, and I agree with you. I was like, we've changed the world, so for the worse, don't for the better.
The thing that interests me most about wrestling, but about the movie, is this sort of disconnect between, or the interplay between reality and unreality, or just falsehood, deliberate falsehood. I think professional wrestling is built on that sort of the tension between those two things. But I mean, this movie stands on its own, I think. But in the movies you've made since, I feel like you've pursued this question of what is real and what's not in reality, in the real world, but also on the screen.
Yeah, well, you talk about, I mean, very few wrestling writers use terms like, it sounds like I'm spitting, but I think it's the microphone, use terms like unreality, and that's one of the reasons why I gravitate towards your writing, because the idea of unreality and how that is intrinsic to sort of understanding what wrestling is and what the nature of it is super important. For me, the cliche, of course, is that you take yourself and you turn yourself up to volume 11, right? And that's one aspect of wrestling unreality, is that the best characters are always the exaggerated versions of yourselves. And also just the idea that it used to be real fighting, it used to be essentially UFC or some sort of like wilder version of UFC fighting where people would punch each other in the head for an hour and knock each other out and then have to like leave town and go to another town and they'd be all fucked up and they'd be like, why don't we just make a little pact between the two of us and agree to pretend so that we can go town to town to town and make a living out of this. And so the idea that a bunch of knuckleheads would agree to create an art form out of faking sort of injuries to tell stories, and would never call it an art form. They would never say, I mean, not all wrestlers, but many wrestlers, and certainly the guys in Lincolnton would not necessarily, except when Pitt says it's like the Great American Art Form, which I asked him to say that, by the way. That stuff is just very exciting to me. To me, it absolutely is a sort of a way of understanding documentary film. For the people who saw Actress last night, Actress is the next step in that evolution. For me, it's when you turn on a camera in a documentary, what we're selling is authenticity, right? Like what documentary filmmakers sell you is the idea that this is an authentic moment and it's true and real. But of course, that's not entirely bullshit, but it's 97% bullshit probably. But what you're seeing is actually the camera heightens your personality, and there's an agreement between the filmmaker and the subject to pretend that the time I asked you to walk in the door, that's the actual time you walked in the door, rather than, hey, I didn't get that, can you do that again? Or even just the sheer idea of a talking head interview being something that is somehow real when it's the most artificially constructed sort of thing imaginable, right? So I think if you understand wrestling, you can understand what I'm interested in playing with those realities, because I remember, like, say Shawn Michaels comes back from a back injury, 2002 SummerSlam, and I knew that he would not be wrestling if it wasn't safe. But they tell the story in such a way that there's a moment where he's wearing jeans to really sell the idea that he's not even wrestling. You're not supposed to see this. And he's been out for 4 years, he's hurt, like this is bad. And maybe just the glory hound, Shawn Michaels, can't get enough of the ring or whatever. And he climbs up to the chair or the ladder, and Triple H is prone on a table. And I'm literally saying, okay, part of my brain says, I know it's fake, I know it's staged, and I'm like, oh my God, he's gonna die, oh my God, and I lose myself. And this happens in all the great moments in wrestling. When you lose yourself to the unreality, I think it's exactly the same experience with films. Like when you can lose yourself to that unreality, it's what happens to the magic of cinema. But to me, it's better to be a smart fan. It's better to know Shawn Michaels and it's better to know that Brock Lesnar just got squashed by Goldberg, and it was Brock Lesnar's idea. And the fact that everyone knows it was Brock Lesnar's idea, it makes it even better. But you still can get lost in it.
Well, the wrestling industry term is kayfabe for the big lie that sort of encompasses the whole thing, and keeping kayfabe is keeping up the characters. Were any of the subjects of this movie concerned about pulling the curtain back?
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing. It seems like you probably think like, wow, that's probably the easiest film to film. Like these guys just were easy to film. They're not much going on in their lives. Easy to get them access. Super protective. I mean, they one of the reasons why I wanted to make a film about these guys is that they are an old school way of thinking about wrestling. It's not, they weren't interested, they weren't playing with the levels of reality. They were like, no, there's rules, and we follow the rules, because if they didn't make those rules, then what they were doing would lose meaning in some ways, So the idea of even filming backstage was, normally they wouldn't let it happen. And Chris Baldwin is my cousin, And in fact, like it was one of my first film ideas was to film him because he was born with all his intestines on the outside of his body, and when we were kids, and I was like 8 years older than him, and I could like push him down, and I'd be like, he's too fragile, and like you can't play with him. And then one day he's like, I'm gonna be a wrestler, and I was like, oh god, you know. So yeah, they were very protective of it. In fact, and the funny thing is, I think looking back on it 5 years later, I do think that they were working me in some ways. Like I think. I'm not sure totally if I know Outlaw really had the cysts on his belt line. When we went and filmed him and he's laying in his bed and he's completely dead, I at the time I totally thought it was legit, but I think he may have been playing up a little bit. I don't know. Like the idea that Zane didn't know whether or not he was going to shave his beard, that's not true. He kind of hints at it. You kind of get when he's like, I have a job interview Monday, so maybe I should shave my beard. But they knew that so they played stuff to the camera that was like, let's make a better story out of this, you know? But importantly, and probably importantly for me making the film and then my evolution as a filmmaker, I didn't know. So when we're backstage and Outlaw has his hat on and he put his coat on, I was like, I can't believe this is happening. Oh my God. I got chills. I literally was like rubbing he's gonna come back and I'm filming it. You know, like I totally got wrapped up in it, and probably that was the plan the whole time. And I just was the sucker filmmaker who got it. So they were very protective, but they let me in. And when they let me in, I think they figured out how to turn it into what they wanted.
You were saying to me a little while ago that you didn't know you had a movie. You didn't know what the movie was going to be, and you didn't know you had something until Gabe had his match.
Yeah.
But there's also sort of an element. I think that. To me, maybe it's just as a wrestling fan, but the triumph at the end is Gabriel, but it's also that they put on this show that was really so compelling the way that you showed it. I mean, part of it's just like you get to know anybody as like a human being, and you don't quite believe that they could pull off something like that, I guess. But so talk a little bit about Gabriel being the linchpin, but also like what to you is the triumph.
Well, the thing was that Katie with I, my previous film, we had filmed for 3 days leading up to her graduation, and it's like sort of if there's any filmmakers, I made a film on 14 hours of documentary footage, which is insane. And so I was like, fuck it, I can do it again. So the whole structure was film for a week, 1 week leading up to one show, and that meant we can basically do this movie for no money. And within that, I knew that we desperately had to find things to happen, obviously. But I also had a belief that, like, based on me, Sean Price Williams, who shot the film, and he shot 60%, we handed the camera up, but he shot most of it. And it was just me and him, and then my brother, who was just helping out, just following characters and just doing everything. And I just knew that, like, if I had enough, like, sort of scenarios set up, like, okay, we'll go to Brandon's work, or I think we can convince them probably to hang out at Outlaw's house one night, you know. Then we would get enough, because I just wanted to hear them talk about wrestling. That's all I really wanted, and I knew that they would. I knew that was who they were, and I knew that we had the strand of hope that I knew the Solar is Gay thing would at least be funny. I didn't know what it would really turn out to be, and I knew that we had the backstory of Chris's being with the weirdest thing ever, his intestines being born on the outside of his body. So the fragment, like you can see enough of a connected dots that you can imagine a story leading up to the show. You say Monday, Friday, I knew that stuff. But we show up and Chris actually said, I got this kid Gabe sleeping on my couch, and I was like, it's cliche, sort of like rookie trying to make his way. It's like maybe that's too lame. And then we go to the porch sequence where he won't shut up, and like any documentary filmmaker will tell you that the person who doesn't shut up is the gift from God, and he's just talking about how he doesn't understand why the halo thing might be, considered homoerotic, and he doesn't understand, when David Hayes says the Roy G. Biv and all that stuff, and I was just like, okay, this kid's like amazing, like he's just like he's incredibly charismatic in his own way, hilariously, just doesn't see, he's the kind of guy who like calls me and says, hey, I called my girlfriend 19 times. Well, I don't know why she doesn't want to talk to me. It's like, geez, okay, sit down. Like it's just like he's clueless and beautiful and amazing. So that was sort of like okay, we can hang it on that. And then Outlaw happened, and then David Hayes, the father David Hayes, was legitimately considering his last match. And that sequence that you see at the very end of the film was actually David Hayes' final match, filmed a month later. It was the only other thing we shot, was a month later we got this extra sequence. And so these stories started to develop as the camera sort of brings about stories, is kind of, you know, the simpler way of talking about a lot of this stuff. And then, but I still didn't know. I mean, we had like bits and fragments and conversations and these things, but I just didn't know. And you know, the show itself is fine. It's not like we edited the shit out of that show to make it really fun to watch, but like it was a little bit like of a drag, and you know. But then Gabe climbs up and he has this match, and there's a moment where he jumps off and he hits Pitt, and the entire crowd is behind Gabe, and they've never been behind Gabe. And it was actually difficult to edit because both Sean and I were filming, and we both lowered our cameras at the same time to cheer for Gabe. And I was like, okay, well maybe if we could just get anyone to feel that feeling that we felt, you know, where like this idiot kid, you know, who's like just dumb as shit, and like, and also just lovely and funny, and like just like such an innocent babe in the woods, has this moment where Outlaw says you did a good job, and you can imagine what that felt for him. You know, if we can make you feel that, we have a movie. So I didn't know that we had anything until that moment. It was just like, oh, okay, we have a movie now. That simple. And that was before the beard thing, which I didn't even know. You know.
We're going to open this up for some audience questions right after this question. So if you guys have any, you know, get them ready. But the audience is the other thing I wanted to ask you about, because it's in pro wrestling. I mean, they call them marks from way back. Like they're like the people at the sideshow carnival that are tricked by the performance, and obviously fans are very aware of what's going on. Although, you know, we saw in the movie that there's a lot of people who seem to be taking it very seriously. You were comparing wrestling to documentary filmmaking earlier. So talk about your relationship with your viewers. Like, do you feel like it's a partnership like it is in wrestling? Like you need them to cheer or boo?
Well, that's a great question. I would actually say that the audience in Lincolnton is smarter about wrestling than most people are about documentary, and I really mean that. Like when the guy's getting up and he's like, I'm going to stop this match right now, he's totally aware that it's all planned, and he's having a good time, and he's playing a character, and he's part of the show, and that their media literacy for wrestling is far greater, I think, than most people's media literacy for documentary. If we could get people to be as smart as wrestling fans, we would be a lot better. I mean, we may not have Donald Trump as president. Like it's that, because I actually think like my wife, who she made a Mexican wrestling documentary when we were going to graduate school together, and that's one of the reasons why I fell in love with her, because I edited it, and it was just like magical. This super smart woman, you know, making a Mexican wrestling documentary, and Mexican wrestling is really about symbols and politics, and it's like a totally different thing, but it has some sort of a lot of similarities. But she finally got it. Like she was like with the Brock Lesnar. So Brock Lesnar just got beat up by Goldberg, who hasn't wrestled a match in 12 years.
48 years old. Yeah,
48-year-old man whose mythology was around the fact that he just beat people up and left. And after 12 years, we thought like this kid, and Brock Lesnar's a legitimate evil monster, and so we thought like he's gonna die in the ring or something, but no, but Goldberg beat Brock Lesnar up in 2 minutes, and it was shocking and crazy and fun to watch, and me and my kids were like running around the room like freaking out. And then I quickly found out that, you know, when I got on the internet like a nerd, and I was like, what happened? I was like, yeah, it was Brock Lesnar's idea. And then I told that to Deanna, my wife, and she said, I finally understand why you love wrestling so much. Like the fact that Brock Lesnar, this asshole athlete, you know, who just cheated to win an MMA match, and like fought, like was his idea to lose in 2 minutes to this old man so he can make more money down the road.
Yeah.
And she finally understood, like, she said, well, her question was, this is important, her question was, does everyone, this was Raw the next night when I was talking about it, she's like, does everyone in the crowd know that it was Brock Lesnar's idea? I was like, probably 65% no. Yeah. And she was like, oh my God, that's amazing, you know? And so she finally got it. And that's what I'm talking about in terms of intelligence. I think like wrestling fans tend to know how to read between the things much better than we are given credit for. No, nothing like that. I mean, the whole thing about documentaries, a lot of times, probably 80% of the time, you're filming people and they really have no fucking clue what you're doing. They're just thinking, because you're making films about real people and real situations, and a lot of times they're just kind of like, okay, I don't know why you want to film me and my job, like, okay, whatever. You know, like, so he didn't have that much awareness of the angles of the movie, so to speak. I mean, after filming for a few days, there was a hint that they didn't want so much focus on Gabe, but that was more about him being a rookie and then feeling like rookies don't deserve the spotlight yet. Like, it's a more of like I mean, it's hazing, but it's not so much hazing. It's more like hierarchical structure that's really important to making the show work, actually. And so that was the only hint of it. I mean, but they did work me. I mean, there was a scene that's like the special feature on the DVD. I think we included it, where Zane and Outlaw had a meeting, and you see that Zane is like working towards sort of taking over. That never happened. Zane went on and did his own thing. In fact, Zane, just a side note, Zane appeared on Raw a couple weeks ago when Raw was in Charlotte, which was one of the best things that's ever happened. I was so happy for him. But they had a side meeting where they were getting an argument, and Zane was like, if I'm going to lose my beard, I deserve to be in the main event. And Outlaw was like, you know the rules. The rules are that the belt is in the main event, and since we're not defending the title tonight, it's got to be the North American Championships in the main event. Well, then I'm not going to do it. And then they just had this whole fight, including like storming out. And I didn't follow because I was like, well, that seems weird. And Zane came back in and said, well, if you're gonna film everything, you might as well film this. And I was like, all right. And then and he slammed the door in my face, and they walked outside, and they're like, man, you're such a sucker. We had the card all built out. You know, they showed me the card, and pretty much wasted an hour of my time. But it was. They were also really sensitive about the word. They were really bummed about the word fake in the title. They really thought I think there was, so they brought me back the second time when I came back a month later, and they knew the title of the film by that point, because I didn't know the title of the film when we were shooting. And they said, well, we really feel like we got sort of tricked, by you, because you put the word fake. And then Pitt, who is giant and so sweet, and I love him so much, and he was so nice to me, and I really felt like he's the kind of guy I immediately just hug him, and he's like, stop hugging me. And he was mad at me. And he's like, Pitt doesn't even want to talk to you. And I was like, oh, this is awful. It was total rib. It was like, they were like 20% mad at me, but 80% ribbing me just because that's what wrestlers do. And yeah, it felt really awful. So they were definitely playing with me, but in terms of you can't have this person, whatever. Zane ended up leaving in a really bad terms, and I think that actually caused everybody to be kind of annoyed with the movie a little bit because Zane's such a big part of it. So I think they ultimately took a step back because they were all kind of mad at Zane for a while. He came back and then left again. He was very ambitious and wanted to get out of there. More power to him, but he kind of burned a bridge there. So that kind of after the fact kind of was a weird sort of thing that happened. Yeah, so 5 years have passed. Chris Solar's still wrestling. He's living in a similar place. He's gotten married. In fact, if you get the DVD, the DVD extra there's a DVD extra where he gets married in the ring, which is one of the best things ever. And there's a shot actually in the movie, one shot that we had in the last minute of him wrestling in a tuxedo. It was because it was the day of his wedding day. But he's still wrestling, and he's starting to feel it. That was actually David Hayes' last match. He's come back a couple times to do short things, but he finished wrestling. Brandon left and came back, and left and came back a few times. Brandon's a pretty healthy dude, and mentally, and so he doesn't want to always wrestle, but he kind of gets the itch and goes back in. Zane has gone on, and Zane has been hustling and trying to get further, up the ladder, and he actually did, like I said, appeared on WWE Raw, and he burped in Cesaro's face, which is a very, very amazing thing to do. It's actually a really good segment. He was really good in it. Let's see, Gabe was a sad situation where, we were all going to the night that David and I met at Brooklyn for the rooftop film screening. It's 500 people. It was like we built a ring. They wrestled. It was like incredible. They never wrestled in front of that many people. Probably never will again. And it was just an incredible night. But Gabe couldn't go because he had broke his parole when he moved to South Carolina, like he said that he's going to do. He actually moved to South Carolina, and the reason why we took it, there's a scene where he was going to South Carolina we cut out because I didn't want him to risk like endangering his parole. But he was in trouble, and then he was driving over we were driving over the Brooklyn, or I guess he texted the girl that he was not allowed to be talking to, and said, "Guess what I'm doing? I'm driving over the Brooklyn Bridge." And of course, we wouldn't let him go to Brooklyn. We said, "You can't go because you're going to be breaking your parole. I'm not going to let you do that." And he tried to get on the bus, and it was really sad because it was like Gabe was such a center part of the movie, couldn't be a part of this big event, wasn't there, but he texted the girl saying he was there and ended up going to jail for 6 months because of it, because he had broken the restraining order so many times texting her. And they finally were just like, "You're an idiot. We got to put you in jail." And so that was really sad and terrible. Totally related to the movie in some weird way. And let's see. Yeah, Hojo still wrestles. Van Mikado still wrestles, the fake Japanese guy. And yeah, they're still going. I mean, the MWF still goes like every Saturday night. It's pretty neat. You can actually follow it online. It's kind of fun to try to catch up the stories.
All right, they're telling me we got to wrap up. So
thanks so much.
The patio is going to actually be open. So Robert and David will be back there if you guys want to continue talking. So we can just move out there.
Oh, and also after that, we're going to where
we are going to watch WWE Roadblock at Plan Check down the street, 2 blocks this way. We already have it all set up. We spent a couple hours convincing them to let us show. Watch the pay-per-view there.
So we're gonna So if you want to come watch wrestling and drink, we're gonna hang out here for a few minutes and then go over there.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thanks, David.